Welcome to the Wiser Wealth Management Roundtable. We believe the best financial advice should always be conflict-free. I'm your host, Casey Smith. Joining me today is your co-host, Brad Lyons. Hi, Brad.
Hi, Casey.
Well, Brad, I want you to think about something. I want you to think that it's 1991. Okay? You back in time?
I actually remember that year.
I think I was a freshman. No, I may have been in middle school, but let's say we crossed paths and in 1991, and I told you in 30 years, former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? He's just a movie star in 91, right?
Yeah.
Would call out President Donald Trump, the real estate guy. He would call him out for treason, right? And all this just after, I kid you not, Becky from Full House gets out of prison.
Aunt Becky?
For prison.
Oh, my goodness.
Right? These are
If we cross paths, the only thing, what's this kid smoking?
these are crazy times that we live in. That's probably an understatement of the show right there. But so today, we're going to cover a financial angle to something that's starting to be in the news that I don't think people understand fully. We try to steer clear of the politics of it, but the topic today is Section 230. Section 230 is what's allowing the social media companies essentially to censure a sitting president.
Well, I don't know that I've ever seen in my lifetime such a small, obscure amendment in a code creates so much conversation and so much angst in people these days.
I put something about it on Facebook, and one of the first comments was that these internet companies don't like it either, but they're willing to pay higher taxes because they hate Trump. And I'm like, this has nothing to do with taxes. I was like, I just deleted his comment because he made himself look stupid.
People will just put together obscure points, as you said, together and create some sort of explanation for everything, whether it has any validity whatsoever.
Right. So I've gone through this. I probably have researched this more than I think that any other podcast we've done, and it really has two sides. One of the two stories really I was kind of really got into is there was a bicycler. She does competitive racing. She ended up over in Wuhan before coronavirus started, and she had an accident. She had a spill, and there is we all know where the flu came from now, but back then there was a conspiracy theorist that had determined that she was like person zero for COVID, and that Chinese are saying, latched onto it and said, oh yeah, well, the Americans brought it here. She was an American soldier, bicycling. And then it ended up having 70 something YouTube videos referencing her in it. Some had her home address. She was getting death threats. Just totally turned her and her husband's lives upside down. And what's interesting to me is that none of it was really true. But it could just be out there, and people were buying into this conspiracy theory.
Well, people come up with conspiracy theories sometimes because they're as we said earlier, they're putting together different pieces of information in a way that makes sense to them, because the actual truth doesn't make sense to them, and our brains just don't work that way. So we try and put together a storyline that fits our bias, the way we think about things. And in this instance, the fact that she was there, the fact that the virus had shortly begun thereafter, somebody just obviously put these two things together and said, well, that makes sense, whether it had any validity or not. And it has created a terrible situation for her and her family.
It was really hard to track down who was publishing and posting these things. There was one particular person that seemed to be peddling most of it. He was removed from YouTube. He was banned from ever posting again. He was connected with other conspiracy theories out there as well. Another story that kind of hit home to me was, imagine losing your child in a school shooting, Sandy Hook, right? And the internet had determined that Sandy Hook didn't really happen. It was a hoax. And this father didn't actually lose his 5-year-old son. And his address got published, and he got death threats of how he was some conspiracy to...
that he was pushing a narrative about Sandy Hook?
Right. He actually started a whole organization that helps people fight back when they're a product of these viral conspiracy theories. And there's other things out there too. There's we never landed on the moon.
Right.
The Earth is flat. That's the latest one, I think.
Yeah.
And then the obviously 9/11 was planned by the government, and the Pentagon wasn't. That wasn't an airplane that hit it. That was a missile. It just goes on and on and on with these conspiracy theories. But I think the one we're seeing the most of is that, President Trump got roughly 71 million votes in his favor. Still about 10 million shy of winning, at least a popular vote. And now all of a sudden we see him being removed because he believes that there was some election hoax happening. And so under the same rules that all these other things were removed that we just discussed, they're blocking him and removing the content about Stop the Steal and things of that nature.
Well, I suppose, as president, he's susceptible to the same thoughts that everybody else is, trying to make, some sort of sense of what just happened.
So let's go back to before 1996. Two companies here on this paper that I hadn't heard their names from about in forever. Let me see if I can find it.
The CompuServe and Prodigy cases?
CompuServe and Prodigy, yes.
Those are names of companies that go so far back. The old dial-up on the internet days.
That's right. So we have how did it go? We have CompuServe, which, I think they were chat boards back then. That's what they were called. CompuServe chat board. They didn't regulate the comments. People posted things. They post anything and everything, and they just let it go. Prodigy would monitor. So they would remove foul language and things that wouldn't be appropriate on their platform. Both end up getting sued over what's on the platform. So these are just companies that are creating that allow the technology to post. That's essentially all it was. And CompuServe wins because they didn't monitor anyone. It's
right.
Like, hey,
so it was
we're not responsible.
That they weren't responsible. Since they were treating everybody equally, and so whether the person's post was accurate or not, they made no judgment as to whether or not it was, the validity of it.
And then Prodigy ends up being guilty because it appeared as though they were monitoring.
Right.
They were just monitoring mostly language,
right.
But
and that makes sense. And you think about it today, that you would expect them to do that. But once they were monitoring some, the courts presumed, in favor of the plaintiff or
right.
No, the prick, right. That they indeed were monitoring it all.
So in 1996, Section 230 is added to, I guess it's the FCC code. It's not an IRS rule. It's a government code for this section, and basically it says this. It amounts really down to one sentence. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. So
when you unpack that, you have to see what all the different entities are. So on the last tours, the information provider, that's anybody who posts. Anybody who wants to express themselves in any manner is a provider of content. That's
Correct.
you and I. That's, people who tweet, people who post things on YouTube, people who, share with each others about what they're happening in their lives via Facebook.
So what this did is help promote the internet in the very beginning of the internet, right? So you and I are liable for what we post.
That's right. We're still liable.
But it allows Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn,
YouTube,
WhatsApp,
et cetera.
YouTube,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Allows all those services to be free and clear of liability for anything that you post.
Right.
So that goes back to now there is the Good Samaritan law. This partially was revised to they can go through and clean up stuff on their own. So essentially, what Section 230 does is allow these media players to be able to do to police themselves, essentially, which they probably aren't doing that well.
Which is the problem that Prodigy ran into back in 1995. But now they're protected by the Good Samaritan law.
Correct.
And you would hope so. You would expect that they'd be good corporate citizens, police their sites for anything that is inappropriate for any potential viewer of that. And they have to look for a wide audience in many instances.
So if you think about it, I guess from a product standpoint, if I go out and I say, okay, anybody can post anything on my site, it could be that people don't want to use the site because they come to it and it's just a bunch of junk. Like, none of this makes sense. It's almost like Craigslist if you think about it. It's confusing. There's a lot of bad actors out there. You get concerned about it. So you say, forget it. I'm not going to do anything here. Where then if you moderated everything, then you wouldn't go there either because it's not real people talking. It's somebody's voice who's screening everything.
Right. It's no longer a platform for what we call free speech. It is speech that has been filtered through the systems of the content or the platform provider.
So those are two extremes.
Yes.
So I think these platforms are trying to find this middle ground where they are removing anything that they know is false. Who determines that? I think that's part of the problem, right?
Right.
And that trying to keep it where it seems like real people are behind it.
Well, in layman's terms, you could think that the internet for many years has been like the wild, wild west.
Yeah, true.
And they made up their own rules and laws back then for that area. But then when, it grew up, it got settled, the law did come and, created, more of a equal law platform, if you will.
So what's interesting is, Section 230 protects Twitter and Facebook and Google or YouTube from being sued. It also gives them the power to do whatever they want in policing their platforms. Mm-hmm. So I guess my concern is you have 3 or 4 people that are now more powerful than the government. They control the media. Most people don't get their news from the paper anymore. Most people are getting their news from their Facebook feed, their Twitter feeds, right?
And even that word news, they're getting news, they're getting information, they're getting other people's thoughts and ideas.
Right.
Right. And when we take that into and trying to assimilate it into our thought process, it gets convoluted, And then what we actually do after that is start gravitating towards those same publishers time and time and time again because it's easy for us to understand, and we don't want to hear things that we don't understand. Whereas the traditional news media, they presumably have presented news, good and bad, every night. For years and years, and people are supposed to have the ability to discern, what they think of this. But the internet has provided people with the ability to gravitate.
I would say even like with onset of cable news, we had headline news for a long time. It was a channel, and it just had the news, and it was 24/7 cycle, right?
That's right.
We don't really have that anymore. The news is pretty much a commentary show.
It's become editorialized.
Sean Hannity is not the news.
No.
Right?
No.
The lady on MSNBC, can't remember her name. Is it Rachel?
Rachel Maddow.
She's not the news.
No.
Those two are almost borderline entertainment. Jim Cramer is not the news on CNBC. That is an entertainment show. He is there to entertain you. So, we don't have the Walter Cronkikes just quoting the news anymore.
No.
Because even on the news hour, it's hardly unbiased anymore. So going back to Section 230. We're trying not to get super political about this, but it has everything to do with politics. Both sides want to get rid of Section 230 completely.
Yeah, politics is bringing this to the forefront.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So both Democrats and Republicans both want to eliminate Section 230 for two totally different reasons, right? So
that shouldn't be surprising in today's age.
Democrats say that Section 230 hasn't done enough. Allowing, for example, platforms like Facebook and to be a place where foreign governments can disseminate propaganda. They're still on the Russia thing, which I guess that part actually happened, but nothing else that they actually claimed actually happened. Republicans feel the law has gone too far as well, arguing that because Section 230 allows companies to judge what content violates their terms of service, they use it to censor conservative viewpoints. So Democrats are saying, "Hey, anybody can post anything that's not right. It should be moderated." And the Republicans are saying, "Hey, you're moderating our voice and our opinions, not to get our voice and opinions out." There's got to be some middle ground.
So it shines some light on what the problem here probably really is that who or what becomes the purveyor of what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
Okay. Now that's going to be a difficult problem to solve, regardless if it comes from legislation or it comes from the corporations themselves, because somebody isn't going to be happy about the solution.
So I'm trying to figure out what does getting rid of Section 230 completely mean for Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. If it goes away completely, that means that they're going to be treated as publishers. They'll be treated no different than the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. If they publish something, not in the opinion section necessarily, but if they publish something in an article that's false, they could be held liable for that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if that's the case, if there's 6,000 tweets a second, you have to develop the AI to be able to go in and screen those, and then have more people monitoring the tweets and even maybe researching the tweet to see if it's false or.
And then the publisher of the tweet to see if there's been a pattern
right
of false tweets.
And then you're opening yourself up to a lot of lawsuits.
That's right.
Just like we saw in the CompuServe and Prodigy scenario back in the 90s.
So what does it all mean to these companies' business model that had prior or current, I should say, is like an open platform for comments and discussion within the bounds of common decency, if we could just put it like that? That's interesting. That's an interesting question for investors to consider.
I think they probably have to move to some type of model where it's pay to play. You're going to pay $10 a month or $8 a month to subscribe to the service
in order to offset the costs.
Yeah, because you can't run enough ads to cover that cost, I wouldn't think, especially if liability becomes an issue.
Right.
So there's probably some points in between that and complete destruction of the service. Don't know what that is. This is all very new, but I would think that that would definitely change the business model.
I would think, given that we know that the internet and technology, I won't say it's here to stay without a doubt, and it's going to continue to evolve, and we'll want it to evolve because it is enhancing productivity, it's enhancing quality of life. this enhancing ability for people to communicate and stay in touch. And we certainly want that to occur, but we want it to occur within certain restrictions and boundaries,
right?
Just like everything else in a civilized society.
I went back and I was trying to look at what Biden was going to do in his administration with Section 230. There was a New York Times article where he says Section 230 should be revoked immediately. But ever since the Trump censor, he's been really quiet about it, almost avoiding the question. I will note that his chosen deputy chief of staff, his name is Bruce Reed, has had a vocal opposition to Section 230, calling it irresponsibility cloak. So I don't know. I don't think it probably needs to be repealed, but there probably should be ground rules laid out saying that you're not liable, but you do have to police these things, right?
Yes. I would think that they're going to continue to limit or shield much of the liability so that there can be a freedom of speech and a dissemination of thought without, undue barriers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the stock prices as this gets discussed over maybe the next year or so. I don't know that it's a top priority for anyone at this point, and it may all just kind of fizzle out once the administration officially changes. And there's certainly millions and millions of people who are upset about what it's doing. And then even, you have a certain segment of people that are going to move to Parler, right? And so I saw all this on Facebook. Moving to Parler, this is my code, moving to Parler. And then Amazon throws their hat in the rink and says, well, no, we're deleting you from our servers under Section 230. So I don't know. We need to have truth. We need to have a lot of people will fall into believing a lot of these conspiracy theories. And so I understand the importance of squashing it, especially the ones that affect individual people and families.
Yes, but, at the same time, the conspiracy theories, have been around a long time. This isn't necessarily a new thing.
Well, it's just a bigger microphone for it.
Exactly. It's conspiracy theories on steroids is what it is, So it's going to be difficult to quiet all these voices. I wouldn't be surprised if we move into a period of time where there are disclaimers, there are warnings, or things of that nature. But to fully get rid of a communication platform when our First Amendment is freedom of speech, is going to be a difficult task for any legislative body to come together on.
The majority of the big tech political contributions, they all went to the Biden administration. It's like 95% of it went to the Biden administration.
Yeah.
Or the Biden campaign, I should say. So I don't know how that plays in it. We have we have a situation where large corporations are cutting off donations to any Republican senators. A few said no political contributions to PACs and individual politicians. I kind of feel like that maybe we should have no money ever going from corporations to politicians, but I guess John McCain would have liked that statement.
Yes, he would have. It wouldn't be surprising if we see big tech actually try and get out in front of this a bit in order to guide legislation, not just in their favor, but in terms of where they're planning on taking the internet, if you will, and helping people who don't deal with this on an everyday basis, such as our legislators, to have a better idea of what is perhaps going to happen in the future. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see them actually proposing legislation to do a little bit more self-regulating, things that they can, take a step towards, in terms of monitoring some content, making sure that it isn't a full repeal or shutdown.
Yeah, I think it may have to be solved maybe by the FCC chair in the end, like in that committee level, because I just looking at where the money goes, I feel like the big tech has bought the representation they need to protect their entities. So the solution's probably somewhere in the middle, not dismantling Section 230 altogether, but it does pose some risk to the business model, and that's something that you should monitor. One of the reasons why I don't always like individual stocks, because you could take on a lot of additional risk like this, where obviously in index funds we don't have to worry about it as much.
No, not as much. No, our allocation to tech is extremely diversified within the sector, so it's not a one incident is going to destroy a sector's returns.
Right, exactly. Well, I hope this was a little more enlightening to everyone listening on the podcast today. Is something that I felt like that I needed to understand the landscape in our own portfolio. We have a slight tech overweight, and I wanted to know what additional risks were there because of Section 230. And this is kind of a summary of what we came up with. Brad, a great conversation. I'll see you next week.
Sounds great.
Weiser Wealth Management Incorporated is a registered investment advisor. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified financial advisor and/or tax professional before implementing any strategy discussed herein. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.